Chesinyakuke, Troy Felsman Louis Quest, Til Inchkalk Uchiskelu, Chinas Lemti Yatlwa, Tama Luke Kem Kemirshi Yatlwa. Good afternoon, my name is Troy Felsman. I'm from Arlee, Montana on the Flathead Indian Reservation. I'm not only a tribal member here, but I'm also the corporate project manager for S&K Technologies. And I'm very pleased that you've decided to join our young dynamic company. S&K Technologies is a company that's wholly owned by the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes on the Flathead Indian Reservation in western Montana. I want to welcome you aboard. My purpose today is to give you a little bit of insight into who the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribes are, a little bit of historical context, to give you a better sense of the company that you've joined and the important history that S&K Technologies embodies. We were formerly known commonly as Flathead Indians, which is why the reservation is named as such. The tribes here, based off our oral history that we know from our elders, dates back thousands of years. We hunted, gathered food sources such as berries and roots in the local area for generations. There were some important things that happened that changed things for us. Number one, back in the early 1700s, we were able to acquire horses for the first time, which greatly expanded our territory and also expanded our options for hunting, particularly of buffalo out on the plains. Formerly, we had resided not only on the western slope of the Rocky Mountains, but also on the eastern slope. As western expansion happened amongst European settlers, many tribes to the east of us had pushed into Montana, which led to conflict with those tribes for the Salish, Kalispel, and Kootenai people, the three main tribes that reside here on the reservation. By 1730, we were fully integrated with the horse. It significantly modified our lifestyle. Unlike many eastern tribes, we actually had not experienced European settlers until the early part of the 19th century. Many of you have heard from your grade school days of Lewis and Clark, and that was our first interaction with European explorers or settlers back at that time. Regardless of what you might have heard in grade school, by the time they reached our area, they were a pretty pitiful looking bunch. We, however, did feed them, traded them fresh horses, and led them on their way to the Nez Perce so they continued their journey to the coast of the Pacific Ocean. Within several years, fur traders, explorers from Canada dropped down into what is now Montana, into our territory, and began to look for ways to make it to the Columbia River from this area so as in order to be able to trade furs and transport them back to markets on the East Coast and Europe. By 1809, we had David Thompson come here, who was a cartographer or map maker, who we named Kukusint in our language, which means stargazer, because he had a sextant that he would use to map out star constellations and be able to get his map coordinates set right. With him, he brought many employees who started up fur trading posts, one of which is only within 3 or 4 miles from the home office in St. Ignatius, Montana, one Jocko. Many place names in the area are named after him: the Jocko Valley, the Jocko River, Jocko Lakes. He left quite a mark. There's some estimates that upwards of 50% of the tribal membership is descended from him in some way or another, myself included. Moving on, we had some important things that dealt with change for us. With the fur trade brought an influx of French-Canadian fur trappers along with English and Scottish brigade captains and the like, and also tribal members from the eastern part of the country, such as the Mohawk Iroquois, also the Shawnee and Delaware people who intermarried with our tribe and never returned back to their home tribes back east, rather staying and integrating with the society here. By 1855, the federal government was interested in entering into treaties with tribes in the Northwest, ours being one of them. Their goal basically was to try to confine these tribes to reservations so as to avoid unwanted contact between new white settlers and these tribes, So to that end, the Hellgate Treaty was written in 1855, ratified by Congress in 1859. In return for giving up rights to 20 million acres of Aboriginal territory, the tribes here were given a reservation of 1.3 million acres of land. However, they retained Aboriginal hunting rights and fishing rights on their accustomed hunting and fishing grounds, which stretched all the way into central Montana. From 1855, we had a number of Indian agents. I think we went through 12 of them in the course of 20 years, starting in 1862. By the 1880s, we finally had an agent that stuck around for more than a couple of years. Major Peter Ronan, who was reasonably fair and equitable. However, he was forced by his superiors to limit tribal congregations of any groups larger than a handful. There was a lot of fear and trepidation on the part of newer white settlers of any gatherings of Indians, whether they were on friendly terms with the government or not, which made it rather difficult for the tribes to practice their cultural ways. However, they would figure out ways to come to the western edges of the reservation up into the mountains to practice their traditional ceremonies. By 1905, a base roll was created, which basically made official for federal government purposes of who was a tribal member and who was not. At that time, there was roughly 1,800 tribal members. The tribes have grown significantly since then. I think the latest number I have been familiar with is we have roughly today about 8,200 tribal members, a little over 5,000 of which actually live on the reservation. In 1910, a critical thing happened. The government, unbeknownst to the tribes, had been planning on opening up the reservation to white settlement. The government felt that there was too much excess land for the tribes here and that white settlers would be able to use it more effectively than we could. Consequently, any land that was not claimed by Native Americans through an allotment program, essentially what that was a way for the government to allocate land to heads of family of individual tribal member families on the Flathead Reservation, basically an 80-acre allocation of land. After that initial allocation was done, anything in excess of that was considered open for white settlement, which had a profound impact on our people here. Due to some machinations on the part of some Indian agents that had been in the employ of the U.S. government, some of the best farming land fell into non-Indian ownership. In 1935, during the course of their work having the hydroelectric facility built, the government became aware that the tribal council in place needed to have some reform. And this is something they found throughout Indian country, where certain families involved with tribes tended to dominate the tribal politics in their individual reservations. And the Flathead Reservation was unfortunately no different. So we became the first tribe in the country to conform to the Indian Reorganization Act, which developed a whole new tribal council to try to ensure a democratic elected government, which broke our tribe down into 8 different districts with 10 different council positions, which would try to ensure equal representation amongst the membership. And we still have that same system of government today, which allows for elections every 2 years, with half the council up for re-election at that time. Rolling into the 1940s, the tribes outside of the dam lease payment would traditionally have revenue streams involved with timber sales and cattle grazing lease payments that they would receive from local ranchers. They realized by the early 1980s that they needed to move beyond that. They needed to become creative. So what was done at that time is they created a new company called S&K Electronics. S&K Electronics developed electronic components for various customers like the Department of Defense and some private companies. From S&K Electronics, there was a new company created called S&K Technologies, which was created at the end of the 1990s and has now grown to the point where, since its inception, as of this past year, from a $150,000 investment on the part of the Tribal Council, has now returned almost $56 million in dividends back to the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribes. The importance of that and the critical nature of that is that this money can be used at the discretion of the tribal leadership in any initiative that they choose. Fortunately for the tribes, culturally, one of the priorities for the Tribal Council is to revitalize our language and culture. Due to the ravages of time, internet, TV, radio, movies, you name it, the cultural knowledge, the knowledge of the Salish language and Kootenai languages were becoming lower and lower. And we realized by the 1990s things needed to change. And at that time we started up new immersion schools that would teach the Salish language and the Kootenai languages to our respective tribal members. And we've made tremendous strides to that end. And to this day, the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribal leadership strives to try to enhance the experiences in order to revitalize that cultural and language heritage of our people. I want to congratulate you on joining a company like S&K Technologies, and I hope for your future success. Lemlemsh, Puche, Nematwichdemensen. That's all for now. I'll see you soon. Take care.